It's been a fascinating day, and there are obviously a lot of like-minded people in the room. Are you sure there is a mood for this progressive centre in the country?
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful to everyone for hanging about, actually, to hear me. And the short answer is, I don't know, but I think so. And sometimes politics isn't about, it's not just about going with the flow, it's about resisting it as well. So my view basically is that the world is changing really fast. Britain is in a very tight spot. The key to it is policy. And yes, there may be many people who don't want to debate it, and there may be many people who despise and hate the centre. But there's no point in being in politics unless you stand up for what you believe in.
Of course, but if you look at what's happened in France in the legislative elections, it was either Mélenchon or Le Pen. You look at the US and the left of the Democratic Party trying to seemingly wanting to take over, and you've still got the very Trumpian right of the Republican Party. In Britain, you've still got the effects of Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, and you've got a populist prime minister. Get Brexit done is still the mantra. Yeah. I just wonder where that centre of gravity, if it is at the centre.
Well, it's a fight. I mean, there's going to be a big struggle, because you can put some of that round the other way. So Macron did win in France, right? The Ensemble party actually is bigger than either Les Nup or Le Pen's party. But it's a fight. He's going to have to fight to get his program through. Schulz won in Germany probably because people thought he was a more natural successor to Merkel than the person from her own party. I think Joe Biden got elected in the US because people wanted someone from the center. Now, does that mean the fight is over? No, but it means that it's not a hopeless fight. My view is, if the Labour Party had been sensibly led, if it had had a proper, sensible, centre-left progressive leader at the last election, we would have had a chance of winning. But we didn't. So the point is, it's all to play for. I agree it's a big fight, but it's worth having that fight, because one of the things that's been fascinating about today is just to see the scale of change that's happening in the world, to see what is possible, and to realize the massive gap between what politics is debating and what the real world is actually doing. And, the whole purpose of my institute is to say you've got the policy makers here and the change makers here, and you've got to put them together, because otherwise what's politics about? It's about what it is about at the moment in the UK, and that's doing damage to our country.
I want to reflect on the course of the day. I was listening to Evan talking about Snap, and him recognizing that the algorithm on social media is such that, of course, the more toxic, the more polarizing, the more extreme the opinion is that's being expressed, the more it's likely to get pickup and support and all the rest of it. Do you find that you're talking about the fight? When you were fighting for power in '97, social media didn't exist, but that is now a reality, and that makes it much more difficult to frame radical centrist policies when you've got people saying, well, it's this or it's that, painting in black or white.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And social media is a revolutionary phenomenon. In many ways, it's a kind of plague on modern politics. And, we've got to, I think someone was saying this just earlier, you've got to be realistic about human nature, right? If two people are having a reasonable conversation here and there's a full-on fight going on here, I think I could be looking that way, really. It's very interesting what you guys are talking about, but hey, it's something really interesting happening.
But isn't that what we've done today? We've had a really reasonable conversation.
Yeah. But, in the end, I'm still going to vote for those two people, not for those two. And that's the art of politics is to make these arguments sing, to get people energized behind them. I think, as Monica said right at the very beginning of the day, to have a muscular centre, not in the sense of a sort of aggressive, but in the sense of being prepared to stand up. And I believe that the type of politics that we've tried to explore today, the problem for the British people, like many other people in democracies around the world, it's a supply problem, not a demand problem. You give them something reasonable. In the end, look, you've got to have faith in people that they will vote for it.
So you're saying that the demand from the British people is there for a different type of politics. It's just the politicians haven't been supplying it.
Yeah, the politics has not supplied it, and I think that's for, I mean, you can debate the reasons, and I think they're quite complicated, but my assessment of it is that because we haven't been able to get a policy agenda where you're making change for people, that they think, yeah, no, okay, I buy that. I think that's going to really make my life different. If you've lost your faith that anything is going to change very well in your life, then actually what you do is you do default to a politics that's, for example, about a culture war, or it's about a partisan division, because you're not thinking, yeah, if we go down this path, I'm going to be better off. My kids are going to get better educated. I'll have better healthcare. And one of the things that I've tried to do today, and I just want to make this point because of something that Polly was saying earlier. I agree that politics can't be technocratic. Right, okay. You know, I've spent my life in politics, and I led the Labour Party through three general elections, so I'm well aware of the fact that politics can't be technocratic. But this is something I learned in the 10 years in government, and a lot of learning since then. You can have the best politician in the world, but if they've got the wrong answer, it's not much use. So the technical part of it does actually matter. And one of the things that's important is for the politicians to be able to take those technically correct answers and make sense of them to people. So if you know, what I thought was fascinating to hear Aradaze talk about the health service, Pete Hyman about education, they're talking about big changes. Now, they're based on analysis. They're based on evidence. They're based on the way the world's changing. It shouldn't be beyond the wit of politicians to turn that into a message of hope and optimism.
Let's talk about some of the policies as well, because I quoted what the CEO of CHAP was saying, Evan was saying. You say there is a revolution coming that's as great as anything we've perhaps seen since the Industrial Revolution. Isn't that to overcook it? In that, yes, of course, there's technological change, but going back to Turing in the Second World War and the Bletchley Park, that was the start of computing, and it's a graduation. Or do you really believe that what is coming in terms of AI is going to change our lives fundamentally?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental. I think this is qualitatively different. And I think the big problem for people, my generation and actually even a younger generation, that's you.
You didn't mean me, did you?
No, I didn't mean you, but no, it's part of it. The thing is, when the world's changing really fast, you've got to go deep and you've got to learn, and that's not easy. I mean, I did a conference not so long ago on that was on blockchain and cryptocurrency, and because my kids are very involved in the technology side of things, so I phoned one of them and said, I've got to give this talk on crypto and blockchain. I said, what's your advice? He said, tell them you're sick. My advice is, don't do it, Dad. No, you don't do that. So, the gulf of understanding is big, but you've got to, one of the things that's really shocking to me is how much I've learned since leaving office. I mean, it is shocking, because the whole time you're discovering new things that make you think of the world in a different way, that make you approach problems differently. And politics is a weird business, because it's the only business in the world in which you take a really, really important position and you give it to someone with no qualifications. No, I mean, even for a football team, right? If you're choosing next coach, let's say Ryan of Liverpool. Not that you would want another coach in Liverpool, of course. But
I'd quite like Liverpool to have a different coach.
Yeah, well, so would I, but Ryan not, no. So, but you know, if you were searching for a new coach for the Liverpool Football Club, right, you wouldn't wander off to the Kop and say, I want the most enthusiastic fan. Who is that? Right, put them in charge. People would say, no, that's insane to do that. That's what we do in politics. So what I found when I became Prime Minister is that all those qualities that may have made you come to power, which are about being a persuader and a communicator, you get into power and you suddenly realize it's all about delivery. It's about executive capability. It's actually about understanding. And that is what is tough today for politicians to do, because social media makes everything very short term, but the problems require long-term planning. And you know, it's interesting, we tried to mix today. We had Martin Lewis, you know, talking about the cost of living, and then you've got Kai-Fu Lee telling you about, you know, China and AI and so on. And the thing is, politics has to do both. You have to have an immediate answer to what's happening with the cost of living and as best you can. But for a country like Britain, if it's going to make the most of its future and find its place in a changing world, you've got to have a politics that can address the long term, the structural challenges, and can do it in a way that insulates it from that short-term politics and even from the electoral cycle.
Look, you chose 3 policy areas and we talked a bit about technology. You talked about the economy and you talked about, as well, climate. Now, leave Partygate to one side and Boris Johnson. But actually on climate, hasn't he shown leadership with COP26 and what happened at Glasgow and the agreement sought? On the economy, we've seen that kind of this, from the presentations, the way that health spending has continued to rise sharply and all the rest of it. And so what are they doing that the Progressive Centre wouldn't be doing?
Right, that's a really great question. So the first thing is, not everything they do is wrong, right? And there's no harm in admitting that. But for example, when you look at what our climate ambition is and the current government plans, they don't match up. They backed off, for example, some of the planning changes that you're going to need if you're going to quadruple renewable energy, which is what we're talking about, and double or even treble electricity supply. So if you look at digitization, for example, it's true the government have got a proposal for the digitization of small businesses, but there's no energy behind it, there's no oomph behind it, and only a small fraction of the businesses are actually using it. If you look at life sciences, we have an enormous opportunity, but we've got to build our technology sector. We've got to make it, those changes that Kai-Fu Lee was talking about, for example, that you would do in encouraging the growth of a different type of venture capital industry in the UK, we're not doing that. But it's not that everything the government's doing is wrong. It's that I think we've reached a point where the scale of the challenge is such that you can't afford to do moderately well. We're going to have to get a plan together that enables us to accelerate and to reach the point where these challenges are being faced and the opportunities harnessed in a completely different way from today. And the nature of our politics diverts the energy from doing that into all the other stuff.
I remember interviewing you years ago and you made the point that, you know, and it was kind of when the West Wing was incredibly popular, and you said, well, what happens in the West Wing is that you get a crisis blows in, and by the end of the episode it's blown out or it's blown up, and you go on to the next episode where a new thing happens. And you were making the point that actually the reality of politics is that there are multiple crises that overlap and that it's all messy. And so here you've got Boris Johnson with the fuel levy, say, at a time when the cost of living crisis is going and people are saying, I need help. Well, what do you do? And
there's no way out of that, and there's no point in being kind of prissy about it. You've got to make the best that you can. And that's why, as Martin was saying earlier, I mean, the package the Chancellor announced on cost of living, I mean, you can debate various elements of it, but it's reasonable. But when you then look forward at what we're doing, for example, to get households to switch and insulate better and move to a cleaner, greener future, we don't have the plan in place. There isn't one. And, you know, look, however passionately I oppose Brexit, I understand we've done it, We've done it legally, we've done it politically, and it's not going to be reversed, right, anytime soon, let's say, anytime in this generation. But you've still got to fix the problems. There's stuff in Northern Ireland's doing us damage. The fact you've got labour shortages is doing us damage. The fact that we got exports down and the pound devalued and business investment down is doing us damage. You've got to fix it. So what I'm trying to say is if you look at where Britain is today and you take where we are and you measure it up to the scale of the problem, it's not that everything the government's doing is wrong, but it's not nearly enough to see us through, and our politics stands in the way of that because the gulf between what politicians are spending their time arguing about and what the country actually needs is vast, and it's got to be bridged.
I'm going to talk about the politics of some of this in a minute, which you've been addressing, but we're sticking with policy for a moment. We've kind of asked people to send in questions, and people have written questions. And this is someone who's been watching on a live stream in Bath. This is Louis. I've just finished my GCSEs, going to take A-levels, but I'm frustrated by the fact the real world wants more from me than the education system is teaching me. How can young people like me best plug that gap so that when we emerge from the system, we're equipped to get good jobs in the world of work? And Louise O'Donnell, we have a lot of young people here today, and we had young people open our conference. How do we ensure their voices continue to be heard, and how can they play a role in politics when perhaps they may not be attracted to any of the big parties?
Yeah, those are two very good questions. Well, I mean, Peter Hyman, I thought, was a great presentation, talked about how the education system might change. But, you know, one thing that's really important to say is that we want what we're doing here now to be the start of something, so that we're also going to engage with the people who are here. We're going to try and build those points of connection with broader and wider society. If you're a young person, get involved. We want to hear what you're saying. We want to bring you into the conversation. I completely agree with what was being said earlier, that democracy can't just be a one-off event. I think we've got to look at different methods and better methods of engagement. But we've also got to say very honestly to young people that the best way to make a difference is to get involved. And that means getting involved in the bit of politics that sometimes people don't want to get involved in. And I always say to people that there are two types of politicians. There are the ones out in the street with the placard, and there are the ones sitting in the office taking the decisions and governing. And in the end, being out with a placard is a lot easier, but being inside governing is a lot more productive. And so part of what we're trying to do is to say, look, you can be exercised about these issues, but you also need solutions, practical solutions. They can be radical, but they've got to work.
Michael Sheehan, I'm not going to do endless questions, but this one seems relevant. How can we affect the changes discussed today? Neither of our two main parties seem willing or able to move to the centre or articulate progressive policies.
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing is there are people in both main political parties who do want to do this. And
some of them we've, participated today.
Exactly. And, the fact that, I really paid tribute to Polly and Ruth and Peter Cowell coming along like that. And maybe if they'll allow me, particularly for Peter Cowell, because he's a member of the Shadow Cabinet, right? So he's in the front line of politics at the moment. And there are people in the Labour Party who will say, you shouldn't be at a conference like this, not just because it's associated with me, but because
But maybe a little bit because
maybe a little bit. Well, there it is. But but you're sharing a platform with people from different parties. But I think when those young people see that type of politician having the courage to do that, they're much more likely to get involved, because in the end, people want things that work. And the politics that simply offers a shriek of protest, it has its place, but ultimately the only thing that makes the difference is getting your hands in the mangle and doing the work.
Right. So you said at the outset, when the introduction to this day, this is not a political party that's being formed, it's just some ideas. If you want to make change, you've set out here today, felt like a manifesto.
Well, what we hope over time...
I mean, why not make it into it?
You're asking me that in such a sweet and beguiling way. But the
Just
answer
a
is
little
no.
innocent question from me.
Go on. No, look, you've got two main political parties. I don't see that changing. But let me tell you from the point of view of the Labour Party, which is my political party, I hope they take this agenda. And yeah, we do want it. We've published the paper on the health service yesterday. We've got one on education coming, another on asylum and immigration. I want to build a strong policy agenda, and then it's there for reasonable people, whether they're Conservative Party, Labour Party, Lib Dems, whatever, to take it up. And at least you get people debating about how you change the country in a way that bears some relationship to the reality of the challenge we face.
This may not be a great metaphor, and I'm going to go with it, and I'm probably going to regret it halfway through. But essentially, you're the Deliveroo driver. You're taking these policies and delivering them. If the Tory party want them, they can have them. If the Labour Party want them, but you're not the restaurant itself.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. I really hadn't thought of it like that. No, it's not. I think we're more putting the dishes before people and saying, if you want to eat well and healthy, try this, or at least engage with this. And, you know, if it's true that we are living through, I think it's true that you're living through a technology revolution that literally is the 21st century equivalent of the 19th century industrial revolution, you've got to understand it, you've got to learn about it, and it's then got to inform policy. So, you know, you can have a debate about healthcare that's about, do you spend a bit more, do you spend a bit less, do we hire more nurses, not? That's a 1980s debate. The debate in the third decade of the 21st century is with all of this technological capability coming on, the things that Ara was talking about, with the ability of data to revolutionize the way you operate your healthcare system. How do we change the system to take effect of all those potential enormous opportunities?
You've talked about the importance of analysis. You've talked about the importance of thinking deeply about these issues. Has Labour not done that under Keir Starmer?
It's done a lot of it, but it's got the chance to do more. And Labour's going to present its policy agenda, I think, later this year and early into next year. And one of the reasons we're doing this now is, from a Labour perspective, I hope this informs a lot of the policy debate. I think Keir has done an amazing job pulling the Labour Party back from where it is. But the fact is, for Labour to win the next election, it's got to have a policy agenda that's absolutely clear. Now, it has done a huge amount of work, but for Labour, if it wants to, as it were, seal the deal with the British people, then I think it's going to be all about policy and expressing through policy the fact that this is a Labour Party that's prepared to reach out beyond its traditional base and pull in people who may be voting Liberal Democrats, some people may be soft Tories. And there's another thing that's really important, because we haven't discussed a lot of the brute politics of this today. But to put it in a very, very blunt, crude way, those Lib Dems voters in Tiverton who were previously voting Tory and now voted Lib Dem in a by-election, right? You want them to stick with the Lib Dems at the next election? Those people have got to be comfortable with the prospect of a Labour government, right? Doesn't mean to say they're all going to vote Labour. I'm not saying that. But one of the things that I always used to try and do when I was leader of the opposition is I wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to make that journey. And, you know, for Labour, the big challenge is when people come to what is always a big decision for a country to change its government. People have got to think, you know what, I think the other lot deserve to be put out, and these guys are a safe alternative to put in.
When you became leader of the Labour Party in '94, you wanted to show that the party had changed and was changing, was more in tune with the British people, and there was the Clause 4 moment at the Blackpool Conference. Where do you think the Labour Party is today on that evolutionary scale? Because it still feels like I mean, I'm really going back in years and showing how old I am now. It feels that we meet the challenge, make the change of 1989 rather than very close to a general election.
No, I think we're a lot further along than that. But I do think...
I mean, would today have been necessary if Keir Starmer had done all this? Isn't this conference in some ways a sign that you think that Labour aren't ready?
I don't think it has to come simply from within Labour. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to involve people from different political parties and from no political party. And if you want the types of things we're talking about today to form a core of policy where there's a consensus around it over a prevailing period of time, here are the strengths of the British economy, here's how we build them, here's what we do about climate change. If you're going to develop that type of politics, it can't just come from the Labour Party. And I was going to say to you, to be fair to Keir, I took the Labour Party over after Neil Kinnock and John Smith, right? He's had a tougher time of it, mentioning no names. But so I think he's done an immense job in taking it this far. I really do.
Peter Mandelson, who I think you know, didn't he say that people have got no idea what Keir Starmer thinks?
I don't think he said that, but I think what he did say is people have got to be sure when it comes to the next election that they know what Labour stands for. And that's true. But we can do it. Labour can do it if it wishes to do it.
You talked about Tiverton. Is that a model for what we saw what happened in Wakefield, we saw what happened in Tiverton? Do you just have, in effect, a non-aggression pact with the Liberal Democrats as the way the political arithmetic is horrible for Labour, given the situation in Scotland, which was, you've more or less swept the board in Scotland, and that's not going to happen in the next election. So therefore, to win, you need to win in England.
Yeah, but I think it's really important that it's not a matter of arithmetic.
It is.
Well, no, it's not, because in a by-election and in a general election, it's a different thing. If you're going to hold those people with you in a general election, what happened at the last election, 2019? You had lots of people that wanted neither of the above, right? And you had either the Change UK people starting, and you had the Lib Dems thinking they were doing really well, and so on and so forth. Right, what happens when you get into the general election? They say, okay, it's Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, that's it. So the point is, and there were people who were vigorously anti-Brexit who ended up voting Tory. Right, okay. What that shows you is, if you want any form, even of passive electoral tactical voting to work, the party that is going to be the party dominating the government has got to be electable in its own right. And that's why it all comes back to the same thing. And it's the strange thing, this is what I find very odd with politics. You are at this moment in time when politicians have got to realize if they want to really change politics, they've got to engage with ideas. The ideas come first. Now, sometimes people, we talked earlier in the day about not ideology, right? To me, there's a difference between ideology and ideals. Your politics should always be motivated by ideals, but ideology in that sense of a hardened set of doctrine that you just never change, that's the enemy of progress in a changing world. So it's, I find when I'm talking to politicians today and I tell them about the importance of policy and ideas, I can sort of see them looking at me thinking, he's been out of politics a long time, really. Doesn't he? On about these ideas, technology revolution, no, really interesting. Now let's talk about politics. And my point is, this is about politics. The things that we've heard today are about politics, right? They're trying to explain the world we live in, understand the world we live in, get the right policies for the future, and get them implemented. But it all begins with understanding. You don't understand the way the world's changing, how on earth are you going to change it? So this is why, if we can do anything out of today, it's to start a process involving as many people in the world of politics and outside the world of politics as possible to get to the right answer, because in the end, the right politics is based on the right answer.
And so future of Britain, this isn't just a one-off?
No, absolutely not. I mean, look, it's been a first for us today, and I've got to thank my staff who've done an amazing job, and our partners, My Life, My Say, and the Britain Project, who've been incredible. Yeah, I won't say there weren't times in the early hours of this morning where I was thinking, God, another bright idea of yours. But I think today is the energy that is here, the vitality, the sense of trying to work things out in a constructive way. Britain would be better off with that type of politics today, a lot better off than what it has.
Tony Blair, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well done. Thank you.